Happy Friday. Welcome, everyone. Today, I am especially excited because, full disclosure, I have my brother on with me, Richard Lang. He is a partner with McDermott Will Emery, and he's here to tell us all about what's going on with the current tax bill that has been bouncing around for months. And welcome. Maybe you can tell us what the status is right now.
Sure. Well, hello, Betsy. Nice to see you and be with you and your broadcast today. And so let's talk about the status of the tax bill. Well, what is the tax bill? The tax bill are the revenue provisions that's in the bill that's called the Build Back Better Act, BBB, which is the almost $2 trillion social spending and climate bill that President Biden has been championing. And the tax provisions are there to raise the revenue for these programs. So right now, the bill is sitting in the House waiting for the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO as it's known, to provide an estimate of whether the tax provisions will pay for the estimated almost $2 trillion in spending. And that's going on because a bunch of centrist Democrats in the House said they're not voting for this bill unless they get some idea that the bill is actually going to, confirmation, I should say, that the bill is going to pay for itself. So last week, the CBO said that it would report this week those figures, but today is Friday and there's no report issued so far. So assuming the CBO's numbers result in enough revenue to put the votes over the top, then the bill will then go to the Senate. And reportedly, the Senate is going to make some changes because one of the things that they added to this bill at the very last minute was the paid family leave. And Joe Manchin has said sort of flat out, I'm not voting for this bill. I like family leave, he says, but I'm not voting for this bill if family leave is in this final Build Back Better.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How can he say he likes family leave, but then say...
I don't know, because I think he thinks it needs slightly different treatment, and he doesn't like it sort of just jammed in this bill.
Just sounded like...
Yeah. So if the Senate passes a different version, because the Senate can pass something different, then it's going to have to go back to the House to be passed by the House in the form that the Senate sends it over in before it becomes law.
Okay.
So I guess the short answer to the question is it's still very much up in the air, and lots of things can change before we see any final legislation, if any, that's going to be enacted.
So having said that, like, what are some of the things that I know was it 3 trillion or several trillion, a lot of money that came out of the bill, and what are some of the things that you think will maybe stay in the bill, and how will that affect us?
Okay. Well, the bill is like 2,000 pages, so I'm going to try to boil that down a little bit. Yeah. Most of it is not tax provisions, but let's start with what's in the bill today and what people might care about. Yeah. And the one provision everybody is talking about that got added at the last minute is the so-called SALT cap. And SALT stands for state and local taxes, like your real estate taxes and your state income taxes. And until a few years ago, all of those taxes were deductible. However, under today's law, there's a $10,000 cap on deductibility. And there are a lot of middle-class people that pay a lot more in total real estate taxes and state income taxes than $10,000. So if this passes, this will be a significant tax saver for many people. And as a sort of a bonus here, this provision, as it's currently formulated in the House bill, would be effective for 2021 taxes. Okay. So this is, a lot of people would view this as a good thing, and it actually will put people back to where they were before the cap was imposed.
It's great for the housing market, which we need some help.
So another provision that's that's sort of raising eyebrows is that proposed surcharge on wealthy taxpayers. And so there's been a lot of talk about, well, we're not going to raise rates. So if they call it a surcharge, it's a rate increase, but it's by a different name. So this is, and a lot of people are going to say, okay, this doesn't apply to me. For taxpayers with income over 10 million in a year, there's going to be a 5% surcharge. And if you have an income over 25 million, there's an additional 3 million. So over 25 million, you're going to pay an additional 8%. This would not be effective until 2022. Now, a lot of people say that's very nice, but that doesn't apply to me. But before you dismiss it, there's some fine print in this provision, and that's how this applies to trusts. And for trusts, there is a much lower threshold. And so that 5% comes in at $200,000 of income, and the 3% at $500,000. Now, there's obviously a big difference between 10 million and 25 million for individuals, and 200,000 and 500,000 for trusts.
Wow.
So they really must have thought that this was going to be some kind of tax dodge to bring those thresholds down to such small amounts. So even if you individually don't have $10 million of income a year, you may have in your family some trust that your parents or your grandparents set up that has a few $100,000 of income. And if this provision goes through, then starting next year, that trust could have a significantly higher tax bill.
That's really important to know, because that is fine print. That is not something that's being, to my knowledge, not that I have my finger on the whole pulse, but that is being talked about on the street. So.
Yeah. Okay, I think from there, I'm going to mention just very briefly two other other things, but there's a lot of other sort of business provisions and esoteric provisions that we're not going to go into today. One I'll just mention is that if you're an owner of a business that's in a partnership or an S corporation, you're likely not paying the 3.8% net investment income tax on all of your income. And that's been sort of seen as a tax dodge for many years. So still in this bill, if it's passed, that 3.8% net investment income tax would be imposed on the balance of the income that you're taking out of those S corp or partnership businesses.
So that would be a raise for most average.
That would be a raise. That would be a raise. And then there's another provision that's, if you have unused business losses, the law for many, many years has been that you could carry those forward to the next year. Well, for certain high income taxpayers, they're not going to let you do that. You either use them this year or you lose them. Okay, so Betsy, you said correctly that there are a bunch of provisions that were in the original Build Back Better bill that was introduced on September 13 that had all the tax lawyers and accountants just like running around with their heads chopped off because they were so onerous and pervasive. And fortunately, many of those provisions have dropped out. And so I'm going to give you a list here of a few of those. The one that most people might be interested in, there was a proposal to increase the top income tax bracket, which today is 37%, back to 39.6%. That's a number that may sound familiar to people because not too long ago, that was the top rate, 39.6. That is out of the bill today. Another provision would have raised the tax rate on capital gains from today's 20% to 25%, and that would have been effective on September 13. So that's the day the bill came out. There wouldn't have been any time to plan, and if you were a taxpayer who was affected by that, there would have been no escape at that point. Your gains would have been taxed at the higher rate. Another provision that really sent people into sort of a panic is you may know that the estate and gift tax exemption is a very generous $11.7 million. So that means As an individual, you could die within a state of that much and pay no estate tax, or you could give away that much. And if you're a married couple, it's double that amount. Well, this proposal that came out on September 13th said basically use it or lose it by the end of this year, because that 11.7 was going to go back down to an inflation adjusted amount of about 6 million. So a lot of people were scurrying around saying, how am I going to use my exemption? Can I do it by the end of the year? That provision has fallen out. There were also a bunch of really onerous proposed changes to how trusts called grantor trusts were taxed. And basically grantor trusts is a trust that if you set it up, you pay the income tax on it. And it's been sort of the fundamental building block of estate planning. And these provisions would have completely shut down the use of those grantor trusts, and even some fairly innocuous planning techniques like irrevocable insurance trusts. You have life insurance, you put in a certain kind of trust, and it's not included in your estate, would have made planning for those trusts very difficult. That is completely dropped out of the bill. And finally, something that the IRS has been after for years, and it's family limited partnerships, where you put a bunch of assets into a partnership and then you give them away and you discount the value. They were going to put in a specific statutory provision that was going to shut that down. So that is out of the bill too. We don't have to worry about that, we think. Oh, and then there's one more thing. For about a day, there was a proposal, the so-called billionaires tax, where they were going to round up the 700 richest people in the country and say, we are going to tax you on the value of your assets, even though you didn't sell anything. Just because you're a rich person, we're going to impose a tax. Well, this is the sort of the brainchild of Senator Wyden, and it was shot down after about a day of consideration. In
Ink didn't even get dry on that one.
And it did not. Now, all of these things that I'm saying that are out, any of them could be brought back, because really the calculus here is they've got to get the votes to get this over the finish line. So if there's something in the bill that is going to cause a revenue, a cost, they're going to have corresponding provisions to raise the revenue. So it's been just sort of totally chaotic.
What? And maybe you covered this, but to the average listener, is there one big change that is going to get the revenue for these social programs? I mean, what?
Well, that's really the what we're waiting to see from the Congressional Budget Office. Now, when this last version of the BBB came out, the White House said it's going to raise enough revenue, but the CBO is an independent organization.
Right, it's not political.
Yes, and so that's why I think a bunch of the representatives are waiting to see if it's really going to raise the revenue.
Yeah, because they got to come up with some way to do it, or it won't get passed. And nobody likes to pay taxes, so it's difficult to come up with something.
Well, I think they're thinking that this surcharge is going to raise a significant amount of money, the 5 or 8% surcharge on very high income taxpayers, and then also this change on this net investment income tax that would tax a lot more of business income that is currently not subject to that tax.
Okay. So that's good, but what is the part that when you were talking about that, then there was a part in the trust that would apply to?
Well, yeah, that is going to be a very difficult provision to deal with if that goes through.
Because that is more, I mean, I don't know if you call people that have, 200,000, is that what it is?
Well, yeah, it's starting at $200,000 of income. then at that point that the 5% surtax would kick in.
Yeah. So that's not the same in the same sentence as with billionaires who
right
would not miss the money, but $200,000. If you're earning $200,000, you're not living on easy street in the United States. So, well, this was and anything that people should think of for their planning. Anything they should be aware of.
Yeah. So I think that there's sort of two general takeaways that I'm thinking about here, and one is if you're thinking of selling a business, or you're fortunate enough to be in a position to have a large capital gain, then you're going to want to avoid that surtax, which means that you're going to want to have that sale take place in 2021. Time is running out. You only have 6 weeks or so.
Do it fast.
And so, I don't think it's a coincidence that Elon Musk has sold billions of dollars of his Tesla stock in 2021, because he certainly would be subject to this surtax. So he's not going to pay the 8% that he otherwise might have paid if he sold next year.
Okay, that's really important.
Yeah. And then the other is sort of, as I mentioned earlier, when some of these really onerous provisions came out, people were running around with their heads chopped off and panicking and getting ready to do things that now I think you sort of take a step back, be prepared. But I know there was a lot of talk about converting IRAs into Roth IRAs, paying the tax, because tax rates pay it now, because tax rates are going up next year. So there may have been a lot of planning things that were put in motion that people need to step back now and say, okay, let's see what comes out before I rush. Yep.
But if you do have a business that you're thinking of selling, now's the time.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen in my practice that there have been a number of businesses that were sold, and people were concerned about the retroactive application of the tax increase. Looks like they're in the clear for now, but there certainly has been a lot of activity because of the threat of these surcharges or other increases.
And on that note, it's really, I just want to say that it's important when your advisors tell you that there's something going on in the wind, that take a look at selling your home now or selling your business. It's because we spend every day with our pulse on these things. And I know a lot of people with home selling are looking back saying, I should have done it when my advisor was telling me to sell it, because the market and times change. So listen to your professional, your attorney, your accountants, your investing people, because they know. So thank you so much for the time. I so appreciate it. I'm hoping we will have you back maybe in a few months, and we'll say, okay. Here we are to discuss this again.
Well, we certainly want to see the end result here.
That's right. We want to find out what's happening.
And it may be nothing. If they can't get the votes, this may be just a
maybe
big
dead.
bust.
We can be right. So, all right. Well, thank you again, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Betsy.
Bye-bye.